All right. Happy Tuesday, everyone, and welcome again to another Learning Tech Talks, where we're exploring the landscape of workplace and learning technology, and so much more than that. But today I'm joined again, Ryan Austin from Synapse. He's been on the show before, so if you've been a long-time listener or watcher, you've probably seen his face before, but he's back because a lot has been going on in the Synapse space. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening over there. But really, the larger conversation is about the operational nature of the work that we do. And while that's not necessarily always a super high profile, glossy, premier type topic, it should be. And we're going to talk a little bit about why, but also some of the things that are happening that can help make it easier. Because I will say, this isn't always something that gets people super excited, and it can feel like, we'll get to it when we have time, once we take care of all the other things we need to do, when I would contest that really this is something we need to take care of first, and all the other stuff will follow. So thanks for joining me, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christopher. Exciting to be on here as always.
As again, it's number two. It's number two for you. So let's do a little bit of background into you, because some folks might not have seen the last episode with you, and people are just getting started because they just start getting the notifications. So let's start with a slow pitch. Because then people watching, they can also join along. And I'd encourage you to comment not only with this question, but along the way, because we'll bring your comments and questions in during the discussion. But I can see there's big buildings behind you, and what seems to be, I'm guessing from a temperature standpoint, it hasn't quite warmed up yet because you've still got your winterized stuff for your patio out there. But where are you right now?
Yeah, so I'm in Toronto in Canada, and
right.
I thought yesterday I might be able to take off the canvases on the furniture, and then it started to snow. So,
okay.
That the smile turned into a frown pretty quick.
It's that time of year. Now, granted, you're further north than I am because I'm in Wisconsin. So, but similar thing. I was thinking, you know what? I think winter's finally made its way out of here. And then we got buried with a couple inches of snow, and I almost had to bring the snowblower out, which was sad panda, to say the least. Is it at least warming up now?
Yeah, it's starting to warm up. So hopefully over the next few weeks, we'll see more sunshine for sure.
Okay. All right. Well, same here. I think we get into the 60s. I mean, again, we've got our unique measurement system here in the States. So for those of you on Celsius, it doesn't translate, but it'll be warmish. Time to bust out the board shorts and flip-flops in the coming weeks. So for those who may not be familiar with Synapse, and again, lots of exciting stuff we talked about backstage. So I won't spoil anything, and you don't have to share anything that is not public information. But we'll see. We might make Christy uncomfortable with this conversation a little bit. We'll see where it goes. But for folks who may not be super familiar with Synapse, how do you describe to people what Synapse is?
Yeah. So the short version of what we do is we're the first operating system purpose-built for learning and development teams. No difference in what like HubSpot has done for marketing teams, Salesforce has done for sales teams, even like Atlassian or Jira for software and development teams. I mean, without Synapse, learning and development teams are still using manual processes or customizing generic project management tools to try and fit it to their operating model, or building something internally through like SharePoint or with IT, which is obviously complicated, expensive, and then you have to maintain it, right? So we're the first platform that's, again, purpose-built for learning and development teams so that we can get behind their mission to enable more people to learn and grow, help them power learning operations, or learn ops as we call it, in their enterprise, and really manage chaos and reduce the administrative work so they can focus on the more purposeful work that they are meant to do, which is, partnering with business, focusing on learning outcomes, and helping people.
all that to say, the thing that I'm struggling with, Ryan, is there's really not that much complexity to the work that we do. It's super easy. There's only like 3 steps to the process. It always goes nice and according to plan. We have a nice conversation. We're told exactly what's needed. We develop a solution, and then we implement, we measure, and then we just start back over. So I'm totally being sarcastic for anybody who has not watched my conversations before, because the reality is, I remember the first time we met. It's been a while. I mean, how long we've known each other for? It's been years now at this point,
Yeah,
hasn't it? I mean, when did you
definitely.
start Synapse? It's been a while.
Well, it's been a journey for sure. So, it's like most software companies. I mean, a story that really resonated with me was, I'm sure people watched like Docebo's story as a learning management system. They're this big public company now, but what people don't
Right,
know
that's
is
not
it
where they
took-
started.
No, I mean, they started in a classroom. Like Alessio was
Right.
a professor. Took them about 10 years to get to a point where, they were ready to take on venture capital and fuel growth. And now they're a multi-billion-dollar company and making a big impact, right? And so
Yep.
it just takes time. So the reason I bring that up is because my career started in entrepreneurship. I fell into learning and development, where I built out a learning function for the Americas for a company. And that's when I started to realize, like, why does it work like this? And I got pretty fascinated into solving those problems.
Yeah.
I left that company and started a consulting company where I partnered with learning functions primarily to do knowledge transfer and build curriculum with subject matter
Okay.
experts. Saw that was a very manual process. So the first thesis of Synapse was actually, how do you take knowledge, map it into curriculum in a more automated way, like streamlining
Wow,
instructional
really?
design.
Okay.
And
Because
then
I remember when we talked. I want to get back to that, because even that reminds me of the journey. Because I also remember when we first started talking, you were really focused on the front end of actually trying to understand problems and translate that. So I'm curious where that piece joined in.
Yeah. So, I mean, we built the product and started getting a handful of customers on it, great customers. And I was like, wow, I have a business now. Where do I go?
Okay.
Right? What's the strategy to grow? And we definitely didn't want to go the route where we would compete with authoring tools or delivery systems. And we started doing a lot of research into the operating side of these learning teams. And so in 2019, we partnered with a couple investors who believed in this vision of becoming the first operating system for L&D.
Yep.
And we started building out product to manage these front end processes, right? So
that's where it started. Because I mean, back then it really was on the front end process.
Yeah. So it went from this design tool to now managing training intake, project priorities. Yep. And then from there, the market tailwinds, that's the great thing of software, is you innovate to a point and then the market speaks, right? And so we just heard a lot of feedback from customers, from the market. We learned about their learning and operations problems and challenges. And to be honest, a lot of people don't even know really about how to solve the problem.
I would say most people don't really know. It is. It's a very complicated problem that I think is often vastly oversimplified. And when people actually start digging into it, oftentimes they're kind of stuck with, I really don't even know where to begin. If I'm, for folks, and they just are like, I don't even know where to start, honestly.
Absolutely. And they shouldn't have to work like that. Like, no function that's strategic to the business or in general should work like that. It's that thesis: work smarter, not harder. We hear a lot of teams where they're over capacity, but it's really about prioritizing, managing the workload, aligning to stakeholders. That sounds easy, But when you don't have the tools and you're using Excel spreadsheets, SharePoint for part of the process, Smart Sheets for another part of the process, PowerPoint for this part of the process, you actually lose all the data and insights behind that work, and you can't make effective decisions, right?
Well, and that's what we were saying before we even went live, is the fact that one of the biggest things, and I think there's opportunity for L&D to think more like an operator, because again, like you're saying, for L&D to really thrive, we have to be a strategic operation of the business, which means we have to be an operator. And I think that point you're bringing up of when your operations are fragmented and scattered across a multitude of disparate systems, you can't actually, it's not even you don't have the data and the insights. It's like you literally have zero visibility into your operations. So even to know where are the breaks in the system, it'd be like running a supply chain and having no visibility into how anything got through the supply chain, and then being like, we need to innovate our supply chain. Where? I don't know, because I don't know where anything is, type of a thing.
Exactly. But this problem actually goes even deeper than what you just mentioned. So to make matters even worse, and to bring more light to this scenario, because a lot of the time it's just about these L&D professionals getting that aha moment, being like, wow, like I actually get it now, on why this is really important and why operations should be the forefront, to your point. So a lot of teams have different operating systems or companies, right? You'll see centralized models, decentralized models, federated models. Each have their pros and cons. But the problem you talked about, and that I shared with disparate systems and workload and all of that, that's per team. So when you're part of a greater enterprise organization and you start having multiple L&D teams, whether it's federated or decentralized, you get a multiplier effect on the pain, and
it gets exponentially worse.
And we hear all the time companies talking about center of excellence, but when you actually dig deep into them, sometimes they don't even know that other L&D teams exist. They're not sharing the important operational insights that could help them both get better, and still be decentralized, right? So these are the types of problems that we've been really jumping into now over the years, and very excited to solve with the new release of the platform that I was telling you about backstage, to manage decentralization, get more visibility around workload, maintain privacy for those cross-functional teams if they have, if they're in different countries and they can't share things. Like, how do you do this at scale, but do it really easily out of the box, so it's not a huge implementation process? And I think we did a really good job. We should, because we spent millions of dollars to do it. But how do you do that? Solve it at scale, so that now you have this de facto data model for the industry that just gets smarter and smarter and smarter as more L&D teams come together and use the software, so that we bring that operational insights and best practice on like how to work better, how to do it in a way that other functions. Again, no difference in what Salesforce has done for sales teams or HubSpot
and it's a good analogy. And I like you earlier, you mentioned it. And Nancy, I see your question. I'll bring it up on screen here in a second, because we'll clarify this as we dig into the operation side of things. But I like how you comment about the fact that it's the operating system, because in many ways, it is a good analogy in terms of, Salesforce's to sales, things like that. It's the iOS for learning and development in some regards, where it's like, well, it's not necessarily all the tools and things that you're using to do stuff, but it's what everything sits on top of, so you know how it all plays together in concert. So the question that Nancy asked, that we'll do some clarification, is, when we were talking about the front end analysis piece, and I'm actually going to pull up something that I'm dealing with right now to kind of help highlight this. But yeah, when we say front end of the operation, it is that. And that is, Ryan, I remember when we first met, that really was where you were trying to help a lot of folks, was this intake, like somebody says, we have a training issue. Well, how do you identify whether it's an issue? How do I identify who the audience, what's really going, how do you know what questions to ask, what details to gather to make sure that you don't end up going down a path on something that you have no business going down a path on? Is that, did I accurately represent that well?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of the process. And I would say that
the front end, Nancy was asking about the front end. That's what we're talking about when we say the front end side of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would define it a bit in a little bit of a different way too, which is looking at the outcome. So a lot of companies have data and analytics on, learning engagement with their learning record stores, using SCORM, XAPI, tracking metrics in their LMS, and then you have your operations, right? Like, not a lot of L&D teams have good data and analytics of their operations. So this leads to the front end, right? When you hear about the industry talking about how do we measure impact of learning interventions and our learning initiatives, the reason why it's so hard is because you're losing all of the data behind the pieces that lead to that impact. So, so let's look at the end outcome. We launched this learning initiative to a customer support team, and we trained them on X, and the results before we trained them were this, and after we trained them were Y. We had a business impact. Okay. Well, you have to tie back also things like cost. How much did this cost us? Because if
how much
was the impact that how much time did it align to business strategy or to partnership strategy?
How many resources did we commit to it? I mean, there's all these factors.
So start at the outcome and now start looking backwards into all the little components that tied into that. And then you will see how many things in your operations that you might not have connected, or where you've created data silos and you're losing the ability to tell that story. So if you go to the very front end of that, it usually starts with corporate strategy. This is our 3-year project. This is our 3-year strategic objectives. This is where we want to get to as a business. Learning team, what skills do we need to develop to get there? That's front end. That's a piece of intake where now the learning team will budget time and resources, work with the CFO, work with the CEO or corporate strategy team to align enterprise initiatives and learning objectives. Meanwhile, you also have your partnerships, bottom-up requests coming to you from your business partners. We're having this problem. Can you help us? So that is also the front end, managing the strategic objectives, managing the intake objectives. Now, when those
and you left out a third one that I think a lot of orgs want to get to but struggle to, and in my opinion, you're never going to get here if you don't get your operations piece, which is getting to the more predictive piece where you're actually bringing things to the conversation, saying we're actually seeing this as a pain point and we think we can solve for this. And again, I think this goes back to we talk about wanting to not be order takers, but it's like, well, if you don't want to be order takers, you have to be clean in your operations so you can be strategic to look at this stuff and say, well, we can potentially identify things before they're happening. Now, granted, that's next level stuff, but I think that is one of the things that I've seen orgs and been part of orgs where we've gotten to that point by doing this, where you actually can see things that others aren't seeing because you're dealing with it right.
No, I agree with that sentiment as well. And so 3 things. I'm aligned with that for sure. but that's usually the intake, which is the front end, to answer Nancy's question. But then, because L&D is usually stretched thin with time or whatnot, you have to prioritize initiatives, score, rank, or whatever.
Yeah, you can't do everything.
To figure out what's going to have the best impact is this initiative to help these 5 learners versus this initiative to help these 1,000 learners, which one will have better impact? Okay, let's prioritize resources and budget there, and we'll still help this other team with the 5 learners do something, but we can't invest a lot of time into that. So you have to start managing this workload and prioritizing. And if you're smart about this, you're going to figure out the way to tie back budget, time, cost, resources to these priorities, and then have visibility around how the team's working to track capacity. So, again, without a purpose-built operating system, you're managing all these pieces.
It's a lot of waste in the system. It's a lot of waste in the system, which again, if you're thinking like a strategic operator, that's one of the first things you want to target is not just where do you make cuts, but how do you actually run more efficiently? Because being more efficient is a key factor. Because I just think of the example you gave where, and I'm sure no one in L&D can relate to this. Okay. But hypothetically, there might be an instance somewhere where someone's done an initiative and then it's done and they say, let's measure the impact of it. And there's a bit of a look back and you say, hey, like you said, it was this, we did this thing, and then this increase happened. Hooray, we had a positive impact. But even if on paper you had a positive impact, which again, that makes me a little bit queasy saying that because it's like, well, there's a lot of factors that you would have to do. But even if you could say we had a positive impact without the visibility into the operations, and I think this is the important part, if you don't understand the time, resources, effort, like everything that went into it, that marginal impact you may have made may be overshadowed by the amount of operations and resources you poured into doing, in which case, while things got better, it actually is a net negative to the organization if you're not careful with this stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. So a lot of the work we've been doing is really focused on helping learning and development teams streamline these processes, ensuring that data doesn't live in silos, and being able to access these things. And so, to the point of our earliest of conversations, we started out initially as this design tool. We did a lot of R&D to becoming an operations platform. And later this month, actually in like 6-ish days, we release our new enterprise edition of the software, which is really cool. It comes with embedded actual like BI dashboards and tools, so that you don't have to figure out how do I set up BI dashboards and intelligence operational reports, while also tying together all the work processes to get the visibility behind capacity, resourcing, prioritizing, all of that out of the box, and it's easy to use. So we're really proud of this because it's 4 years of R&D leading to, April 25th, 26-ish time frame.
So 6 days and counting till you're doing this. And again, I want to dig a little bit into some of the challenges, but just to kind of highlight some of this, because I can't emphasize enough how many times I've partnered with organizations to try and help with. And we talk about it like, and again, you tell me, but I think even based on our conversations, you would acknowledge this, that it can sound like, oh, just like fix your operations, as though that's a simple fix. And there's a lot of work to be done with all of this. I mean, I showed you this backstage and I'll post about it later this week, but like the operations that we have is extremely complicated. Like L&D is not this simple, nice linear things move through and we do it and we always end up at the end and then we just go back and fix it. I mean, and again, the 6 kids has the chutes and ladders analogy in mind for me, but it does. It's like you bounce back and sometimes you're here and then the scope changes and you need to revisit, and trying to understand and manage all of that is no small task. So I am curious with this because you've been doing a ton of R&D with this. You've been working with a lot of orgs. From your perspective, where do some of the biggest, and again, if you're watching and listening, I'd love to hear from other folks what some of the barriers to this for your orgs are. because I get it. And I've been the one trying to hammer this in multiple occasions through my career. And this is not an easy path to pave. So I'm curious for you, as you've encountered orgs who are saying, you know what, we get it. We get it. We should do something with our learning operations. We see what can be done with it. What are some of the barriers to entry for this? Because I've seen people go down this path and say, we want to do it, and they burn up in the atmosphere.
Yeah, I think self-reflection is the first part to it. No, just recognize that there's a problem, and that's okay, because you're not facing the problem alone. Literally, the entire industry. We talk to dozens of L&D teams a day now, and everybody is facing the commonality between the conversations we have. When you talk about repeatable, like scalable, like this is a repeatable and a problem that is at scale for the industry, right?
Yes.
So just recognizing that you're not alone and that you have a problem, and we acknowledge that you've hired really smart people who are coming from other companies and have set up BI dashboards, or you're working with some of the big or consulting groups or whatnot to try and solve this. But it hasn't been a problem that's been solved at scale. We talk to, I'm in a conversation right now with a Fortune 50 company without naming who they are, and they haven't figured it out. We have Fortune 10 customers. They haven't really figured it out, right? So, and then we work with mid-size enterprises who aren't as decentralized. They might only have one or two L&D teams, but the problems that they have are the same problems that the Fortune 10s have, just not at that level.
It's not at the scale.
Exactly.
That's just it. Even small companies, it's like you're either solving for this on a small scale with maybe a single L&D team, or you've got a big enterprise, same problem. It's just, like we said, escalated exponential complexity because there's 57 learning teams scattered across 42 countries, all running in different silos.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think the second point is seek help, right? So if you're not operating with the efficiency and effectiveness that you think your team should have, or if you do not have the operational insights to be able to make effective decisions daily behind trade-offs on which products to trade off, or where your team's time is being spent, low priority versus high priority. So when that next request comes in, that might be mission critical. Think about COVID. Nobody knew that was going to happen. Overnight people had to work, right? You still have this list of projects that you need to work on. You need to understand where time and resources are being spent so that you can make those trade-offs as an L&D leader, right? And align to where you can make the most impact, because our mission is so important. It's to help people learn that we want to help with everything, right? But at the same time, part of a corporation, or you might be an independent helping corporations, you have to align to where you can make the most impact. And unfortunately, time is not unlimited, so you have to prioritize. So being able to break down those silos. So often you'll start recognizing you have a problem if it just seems in your gut that it shouldn't be this hard, right? And if you feel that it's harder than it should be, and you've been at it with your team trying to figure it out, then recognize this problem, seek help. Not without pitching.
But ourselves, I mean, even with that one, I just even think about it, as one of these, like, if you're looking for the litmus test, I mean, I just even think about when I've gone into orgs and said, okay, how did this get done? And when it takes more than, I mean, okay, well, there's probably some room to improve this, because if you can't go, well, it gets done like this, and let me pull this up, or here's where this, and I would say, I like you said, you're talking to these, high level, well advanced companies who have spent lots of time, lots of consultants, lots of smart people working on it, and they haven't solved it. That should be a very familiar feeling to leaders and even folks in any of the roles where they're like, Okay, I might just even think for IDs, if you're like, where did this request come from? If you have to ask that question and can't get an answer relatively quickly, you have opportunity for operational efficiency.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, just talking about that, a lot of people are trying to figure out like how do we build data skills, project management skills, and they often default to like hiring that specialist on their team. And if you do that and you make that investment, that's good to have that domain expertise. But everybody on the team de facto needs to have some basic skills. So with the right tool and running learning operations properly and effectively, it actually comes to them naturally. Like what's really interesting about our platform is that it's easy to use. People get onboarded in like a day, and they naturally start getting these skills because of the functionality that's brought to them out of the box, right? So it teaches you how to collaborate, how to assess priorities, how to look into capacity insights. So when you're doing your stand-ups, you can talk as a team about like what to prioritize, what trade-offs to make. So these skills come to you naturally. And now with this new embedded BI functionality that we added into this release that's coming up, our major investment area this year is into data science. Again, you shouldn't have to figure this out by yourself, what to do with the data, how to help automate, streamline work processes with the data, bring data into your decision making so that you don't have to go and search for it. It's in the flow of work. So that's kind of where we're going next now with things, is because we have this data model that's specific to learn ops and learning operations. How do we make it smarter and bring that operational smarts to you as a customer or to the industry to help you improve, so that again, you can focus on your mission, which is to enable learning and not think about this stuff so much.
All the other tentacles. So let me ask you this. I want to kind of circle back on one thing. And then and Nancy, I see your question, so I'm going to bring this up. Because I think one of the things you brought up in terms of some of the challenges to getting started with this is your acknowledgement that it's of saying, you know what, it's okay if you haven't figured this out. Very smart people have spent years and lots of money trying to figure this out, and people haven't mastered it. And I think sometimes that feeling of like, if I admit we're not doing this well, I'm admitting I'm failing. You know, I'm failing as a leader or as a participant or as a function owner. It's like, no, you're not. And recognizing I'm not, this isn't going well and I need help isn't an admission of, you know, you're not enough. And I think recognizing that and being okay with that, it's an important point to emphasize, because I've seen that paralyze organizations where it's like, I can't admit we don't have this in order, or I can, because what if people know that our shop is what if people know our shop's a mess? And it's like, you know what, everybody's is. Like you said, I don't think I've talked to anybody, and I talk to a lot of people in our space. I don't think I've talked to anybody that said, you know what, we have perfectly streamlined all of our operations, every single thing buttoned up, mastered. We know the ins and outs of everything, and nothing ever is out of whack. So I think that's really important. I think the other thing though is that it can, and I'm curious how you deal with this with organizations. I've seen folks have concern that visibility is going to lead to bad things. Like, well, if people know how the sausage actually gets made, you know, type of a thing, well, will there be enough work, or will we have things to work on, or will people, and my personal experience has been the opposite. Transparency has actually had better effects on credibility in the organization. It's had better effects on team dynamics, culture, things like that. But also the other thing that I found with it is that transparency is not seen as a negative. And to the concern of, well, what if there's, you know, not enough? Like, what if we really optimize our efficiency and we optimize our way out of a job? That's another one that I've heard from folks is, well, we might efficiency ourselves out of things. We might have to cut. I don't think I've ever encountered a single L&D org, to this other point, that there's not things that they go, I really wish we could get to that, but I've never met anyone that goes, we've solved all the problems, literally everything in the org. And on top of it, things are changing so fast that it's like, even if you solved everything today, by next week, there's going to be new problems that are COVID's going to hit and blow things back up, or something's going to change. Your business is going to disrupt its fundamental operating model, and you're going to be back at square one. So I think those points are important, because I can see those have nothing to do with operational knowledge or technology, but I can see them being major pain points that prevent people from even getting started.
Yeah, I guess I could see that, but in another perspective, L&D is definitely going through a transformation right now, and I think post-COVID, a lot of companies woke up and saw the impact that L&D had in helping to navigate the workforce through COVID, right? So they are finally looked at as a strategic function for the most part in the business, right? And this is true to any department, not L&D. But if you're working in a business, you're part of a board meeting. So what do I mean by that? Like, in a board meeting, the executive team is going to report on your functions and your OKRs and your corporate objectives and your targets and how things are happening, et cetera. And so if you're hiding that transparency versus opening up the door, your boss's boss or whoever is going to ask for data. And if they don't get the data, that's when the value creation starts to diminish, right? And so, if you start looking at it as how do we create value for the organization and provide the visibility, organize our operations to get rid of the chaos, provide the visibility to align to strategic and learning objectives for the company, and be able to show that story, then that's going to have a positive impact to your bosses some point through the reporting to that, all the way up to that board meeting, right? But when you can't track that backwards, that's when people start questioning things. And
exactly,
it's very similar to actually what marketing went through like 10 years ago.
They went through the same thing.
This is a cost. It's, where's the ROI? And then actually when all these softwares started popping up that could track back return of ad spend and what that meant to revenue and stuff like that, it was like, boom, marketing's a strategic revenue driver now, right? So learning's kind of going through this. And not picking on any companies, this is public knowledge, but like the parent company of TikTok, I forget the name, ByteDance maybe or something, they actually released an article saying, we're changing our L&D team and we're restructuring it because there was too many like good feeling things that didn't tie back to the business objectives. So they actually reorganized things so that they could measure this, right? And that's the trend in any business unit, not just L&D, especially if you're working in a corporation, because you have to have that accountability and track back to return of learning investments, right? No difference to like what marketing teams did. For marketing, it was like IT, right? Like developers.
IT did the same thing. We have all these resources. What are we actually getting for it? No, you're spot on. And I think my point in that is there's a lot of folks who may be starting to recognize that as we've been cast into the limelight. And the reality is it's a mess. It's a mess. And I think that can just human psychology is sometimes you just want to like bury it and hope it goes away, and it's not going away. And I think that's where acknowledging, you know what, we've got opportunity to impact it, and now we're going to do it. And here's what we're going to do. And here's what we're hoping to find, and not being afraid to say there might be things we find that we're doing that aren't adding value. And we may have to cut it. Like that doesn't necessarily mean people, but it may mean priorities. We may need to say, you know what, we need to shift these priorities because this is non-value add activity. We need to move it over here. And that's just part of being a good operator.
Absolutely. And, to people who are actually trying to figure this out, like feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We work with a lot of industry analysts right now on this. We've released white papers. We do webinars, ebooks. We have a lot of resources to help support you. I'll do a spoiler alert for this quarter that's upcoming. We're actually releasing a freemium product to really help the industry and get behind our mission. And so people can actually use the product for free, like really for free, not time bound. And then as they grow, in addition to the technology, get our support from both education perspective behind LearnOps and also a community. So, we have a private Slack group that's open to LearnOps professionals. We're going to have different applications available soon for that. So that's another spoiler alert. But there's a lot of investment that we're doing to solve this for the industry as a community so that you're not alone. Right. And that's
it's kind of,
really important to us.
And I think, you've thrown HubSpot out there in some ways, but in many ways that's in a large, they did a lot of effort to do that, to help streamline this stuff. And that's what they've done. If you're not familiar with HubSpot, similar type thing, organizations that do not have their, business dev stuff organized, you can start with HubSpot to be able to get into it and get stuff started. And then you can grow with it. So the question from Nancy that, again, we're ping-ponging a little bit, but I knew we were going to fill the time, no problem, is, so in terms of some of the research you've done into this, part of this, when you were looking at it, what kind of companies were you looking at, in terms of, were they ones that were doing a great job, it was a total train wreck, somewhere in between, a mix of that? And have you found anything along the way where you go, hey, somebody's doing this without technology? Granted, as far as I'm concerned, technology is just an accelerant. So somebody's got to be doing it well in one capacity, but you go, well, we could scale this 10x if we had technology to enable it.
Yeah. So from the research perspective, we have a really interesting white paper with Brandon Hall. Happy to share it with you, Christopher, and you can share it out after. It's hard to get into it all because it's like years and years of this. We have 2 PhDs on our product team now, right? One on data science, one on learning technologies and information technology. So, but this is comprised of working with hundreds of L&D teams over the last 4 years. I would say, although we've worked with smaller teams up to 3, we've really honed in on when the problem starts to scale with like mid-size enterprise and large enterprise, because of that multiplier effect. The pain becomes a lot deeper. But even as such, to answer the second question, we still see big companies who have this problem at scale trying to do things manually, and it's tough. So the de facto right now is using like some sort of email or Google Sheet or Google Survey or Microsoft Survey to run intake, or a lot of people getting IT to set up intake with SharePoint or ServiceNow.
Intake forms,
they have
it's
access
something
to
in
it.
place.
Same with generic project management tools. Or Excel spreadsheets. We used to see a lot of Excel spreadsheets pre-COVID, but now because of collaboration and remote work, a lot of companies have opted into these generic smart sheets or Mondays,
smart sheet, Asana,
Monday. These project management tools, and because they're free to L&D, they adopt them and customize them. But the one problem with that really is that those tools, because they're generic for every team in the company, they're not built on a data model similar to Synapse, right? So like our data model is built for L&D. That drives the insights of the BI and the dashboards in the platform and the different types of connections that we can do into the different technology stack as well, right? So being purpose-built has a lot of strong advantages to actually solve this problem at scale. And we have seen some people where they've opted into kind of generic project management tools, and they don't get that team adoption after 6 months to a year, that they actually start to build stuff on their own. So we've seen some L&D teams have an engineer or two on their team, and they're actually building an internal system just because they didn't know that there was an actual platform off the shelf that they could buy. Right.
Well, and what's funny about this, and we'll talk about this because I've got a follow-up question, is, and that the analogy I think about as I think of kind of the evolution of tech in the workplace is as SaaS platforms started standing up versus custom, in-house built things, where there was a period where that was the thing to do. You built your own form fit solution. You hired software engineers, you built a platform, you kind of wired things together, and that was seen as superior. It was like, well, that's what you do if you have the time and resources. And I think as SaaS and PaaS started taking off, companies started realizing, similar to our operations analogy before, that it's like, well, maybe you could build a totally custom form fit thing for your organization, but unfortunately, the time resources you spent on it have now vastly outweighed the value you're getting out of it. And two, you're building it based on your lens into this, which that doesn't scale in terms of, okay, what we do, while nuanced, is not, you said it, it's not different at every single company. If you're running L&D in a pharma company versus a large manufacturing company versus a retail company, at the end of the day, what we do, there is way too much similarity to say, yeah, our operation is completely different. What we do is so different. We have to custom build a thing. And I think that's a mindset shift that has to happen. It's this one, not recognizing how much waste and resources is going into building this custom form fit solution, and also accepting the fact that what you do isn't that different. And there's probably somebody, the data would tell you what the best way to run it is, but that's letting go of that kind of, well, I know best.
Yeah. I was smirking because, also everybody's been part of org change, especially, in L&D. Like, how many times have you been part of an L&D team, new director, a new VP, or a new CLO comes in place and goes out with that LMS, in with this new one, right? And
yep.
We're starting to see that happen from an operating model perspective.
Yep.
Decentralized, I'm moving us to centralized. Centralized, I'm moving us to federated, right? And it's a big problem. So if you have a homegrown tool or something like that, the data is living in silos, you start going through like a year change initiative. It's unnecessary complexity. In Synapse's backend, you can map L&D structures to your org chart. So it's as easy as like, we want to go to a centralized model. All these decentralized teams now can report into this one function. And you can actually do that in Synapse's backend. So there's no change. You could do it probably in like an hour or so with the help of our customer success team. So that's just one example. But there's a lot of transformation going on in the industry right now. And so it's just about having the awareness and knowing that there's partners out there to help solve these problems.
Okay. Well, what made me, so I was smirking on my end too, because this pendulum swing of like, we're centralized now. Oh no, we're moving back to DC. Everybody has been on that high seas ship where you're part of the org and it's, we're centralizing everything. Oh, no, we're breaking it up and we're putting learning back into the business type of a thing. And what I've found is a lot of times it's largely driven by lack of visibility or a clean, streamlined operations, because people are like, we don't really know what to do. So maybe if we restructure, we can fix it. If we put everybody together, we can get the operations fixed. And then they're like, well, that didn't work. They're not delivering on what we need. Let's bust it up and put them out there. But I think what also made me chuckle about that is even organizations that think they're fully centralized, they're never fully central. They really aren't. There's no such thing as a truly centralized, or there are pockets of L&D somewhere in the business that you either just don't know about, or you kind of are like turning a blind eye to, because you're like, well, yeah, they do that, but that's not really L&D. And it's like, well, it is, and they're doing this stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. And even if you look at that thing, do we make a decision to go centralized or not, and not having that data? So let's talk about if you actually had the operational foundation to get the visibility and making that decision. A lot. So to answer Nancy's question about like, do people do this more organically? And I talked about using like email for intake, or
Yeah.
setting up some
Or a
survey.
Google form or
Yeah.
Microsoft
Okay.
form type
So
thing. Yeah.
let's talk about that. And let's say hypothetically somebody came in and we use that example. Do we go decentralized or stay centralized, right? Well, if you have one intake form that you stuck together and you're just treating it as like a one survey form to do a consultation, you just lost all the value of setting up a real intake process, right? So
Yep.
real intake process should actually be aligned to the partners you support, whether it's functions or types of learning and development, and being able to have the robustness to like tie back to that data, so that if that leader came in and said, I'm thinking we should go centralized from decentralized. Well, now if you have reports to actually show how many requests came from these different partnerships in the business, like maybe it was, maybe you had a partnership with IT and then also with, 4 other departments, and IT requests for learning and development were 80% of where L&D's team was
Yes.
spent.
It drives the
I,
conversation.
I would actually say, well, we can go centralized for all other areas, but we need to maintain an IT partnership and a separate
Right.
team
Because they have
it's
heavy
consuming too
volume and
much.
need. Yep.
Exactly.
And their requests are way too, because of our process, we're able to identify that the needs they have truly are very unique to their function. They aren't these general things that are masked as kind of, oh no, we have a need. And you're like, well, actually, that's kind of the same need as everybody else. So again, you're becoming a strategic operator and saying, I think there are components we can centralize, and using data and our process, let's define what parts can be centralized and what parts can we say, there's just no way to do it, because what's going to happen is they're going to be upset. And I've seen orgs do this. They centralize something, the business is unhappy anyway, and they go, forget it. We're dedicating headcount. We're just going to rehire those people back. We're just not going to tell anybody because they just took the headcount. And then it ends up into a turf war over resources.
Absolutely. And here's the funny thing too that we've seen. Like when you're not working smarter, your team is more prone to burnout. They're actually more stressed. They don't have visibility into their own work. They usually don't even know how to prioritize. They have that lack of leadership. So you're creating more unnecessary problems that distract the team from your core mission when you're not working smarter, right? And so and these sound like hard problems to solve, but if we just look to other functions outside of L&D, they have solved them. And the smartest functions are using purpose-built software to do that, right? Like, could you build a CRM in Smartsheets? Yes.
I mean, you could, but I think if you went to any good sales team that's doing anything, or marketing group, and said, hey, do you use a CRM, or are you building one? They'd laugh at you if you said, oh, we're building one ourselves.
Absolutely. Right. So and it was the same for like IT back in the day, right? Before IT went to agile from a waterfall approach, they were using whatever tools, and then companies like Atlassian and Jira saw that and built real businesses out of it. And you see L&D using Jira sometimes and whatnot, because IT has so much influence now in the corporate world that they have these enterprise licenses. So they're like, hey, let's use this and give it a try. And we just see a lot of problems with that for learning and development teams, because again, they're not built on the foundations of LearnOps.
So let me ask you this, because this is a legitimate and I think fair question for folks, because that problem, going back to what are some of the barriers to this, that problem is real. And I've been in conversations with IT leaders on multiple occasions where this is a challenge, where they go, we've already got that. We already have that. And they're looking at it going, and it works great for us. And it's like, well, yeah, you're IT, right? So you're IT. So of course it works great for you. how have you, and in 1 minute or 90 seconds, because we could probably have a whole conversation just on this piece, but
Yeah.
I mean, we honestly could, because that is a real barrier where it's like, I think you don't need that because we have a project management tool. Okay. Yes. How do you help organizations kind of get over that barrier? Because that legitimately can be you're trying to articulate, we need a purpose fit tool, and they're going, we have one. And it's like, that's your purpose fit. Our purpose is different.
Yeah, I think, and where I coach a lot of champions who are looking to move into LearnOps, because it's a newer type of category or software, right? So where I tend to coach people usually is to focus on analogies, right? So
Okay.
so align to them. So there was this one company, utilities company, and they were getting the objection from IT about Jira, and but they also had Smartsheets somewhere in the company, and so we approached IT and we said, well, would you stop using Jira and move into Smartsheets? They were like, no, why would we do that? And then we were and then we just reversed it and said, well, why are you asking us to do that then? Right? And then usually they get the aha moment. You also need to have a good business case. So you want to show like the return of investments. Like this platform will pay for itself over 3 months of time because of the time savings, cost savings we're going to get out of it. Here's how that will work. And by the way, the price to get started is only X dollars per year per user. And so it's not a lot of risk, right? For us to take versus the outcomes we can get to drive learning more strategically for the business. And you might have a couple obstacles because that's just how bigger companies get.
You do in general.
Politics.
It's yeah.
But a good CEO of any company will look at that and say no brainer.
Okay. I think it's a good thing. And for those who may be doing the MacGyver approach right now, I think one of the big things is I've found is really kind of going back to your business case, articulate where it's not working and why and what you can get if you were to fix that. Because I think sometimes being able to tell that story, like you've recommended this, we've done our due diligence to say, I get it. We have enterprise licenses. You're asking us to look if we can use it. But don't just go to the table and go, we have a special ask for a new L&D tool, because you'll literally watch IT people's eyes roll into the back of their head because it's something they hear pretty frequently. And I think that's where your point is spot on. So I appreciate you kind of coming into the home stretch with that one, because I think it's a good way for folks who say, you know what, we do need to do something different. It is a pain point. The pain is real and we want it to go away. And believing that it can, because I think that's another thing. I think some people have just accepted it's just the reality. And it's like, well, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, no, that's right. And so I'll share the white paper with you. You can choose to share it with everybody, Christopher, to help them learn more about this. And, big news coming on our side this month from branding to potential names to,
Christy's going to kill you.
And, this quarter with the freemium product, so we can let you know and you can share with everybody. Like, we really want to help the industry progress in this area so that they can work as smart as all the other functions too.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ryan, for making the time. Thanks for joining. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. Hopefully you got something out of this conversation, and more to come on this. Feel free to join the community where we'll share all these resources later. So I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week and a great afternoon.